That is Will Hurd. He is a former Republican congressman from Texas and a former undercover CIA officer. It's so good to have you on, Congressman Hurd. It's good to see you. And as I said, you know deeply about this problem because of serving as a congressman there. You're in a border state. What are you seeing there in Texas? How do you think officials have been preparing for the end of Title 42 coming in just 2 days?
Well, the officials here are freaked out, to be honest, about the impact this is going to have on local communities. When I was in Congress, I represented all the way from Eagle Pass to El Paso, and so those images that y'all were showing are things that I lived when I was in Congress. And let's get some context to this. The city officials from El Paso over the weekend talked about how they were dealing with about 2,000 folks coming across the border illegally a day, that when Title 42 goes away, they're concerned that the Biden administration and officials are going to start allowing, which ultimately up to 4,000, 5,000. They're even preparing for 6,000 people a day. These are crazy numbers. And to give some context, I think we've all seen the clips of Jeh Johnson, the former Homeland Security Secretary under President Obama, who once said during a hearing that if they were seeing 1,000 apprehensions a day, that would strain the system. That's over the entire system. And just in El Paso, we're seeing 2,000 now, potentially going upwards. This really is a crisis. I think President Biden, to show that there's going to be a change, he has to get rid of all of his officials that were involved in border security. I think that includes Secretary Mayorkas, because they have no credibility in the United States. They have no credibility outside the United States. And people outside the United States think that the U.S. has open borders, which it doesn't. And these communities, a place like El Paso, these are inhumane policies. I could make an argument that President Biden's policies are more inhumane than Donald Trump's. And Donald Trump's was terrible. It was the worst of any president before him, because you're going to be having thousands of people sleeping on the streets of El Paso, and starting this week is probably going to be below 20 degrees. That's an inhumane policy, and they need to do more. And one of the other areas that we're seeing,
well, Congressman, give us a little time here. I understand you have a lot to say, and you said a lot of things here, so we want to respond to some of it. But give us a little time here to ask you some questions. Caitlin, go on. What do you?
Well, I was going to ask you about if Biden has the legal authority to extend Title 42, but you are saying that he needs to fire his Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas.
Yes, of course, because this crisis has escalated under him. There's other ways to do expedited removal. You also have a Title VIII authorities, and what a new Secretary of Homeland Security should be coming in and saying, listen, we're going to use the Title VIII authorities to the same level that we're using Title 42. Right now, you're not seeing the number of expedited removals that Border Patrol is legally allowed to do. Expedited removals were people that don't have the right documentation, that lied about why they were coming into the United States and had come into the country, or had been apprehended within 14 days of coming into the country, and somewhere within 100 miles of the border. This is a title and a policy that has been used for many administrations, and why the Biden administration is not using it to the same level of authority they can, I do not know.
You said, listen, you said that, the Trump administration, that the policies were horrible. You think that the Biden administration is worse. But listen, you're putting it basically on this administration. You've said a lot about it. And the buck does stop with the president. But here's a question. Mm-hmm. Both Republicans and Democrats have been dealing with this issue for a long time. Republicans have blocked a lot of legislation when it comes to border security. So shouldn't it be the Congress and lawmakers? Shouldn't some of the onus be on them to come together and work to fix this problem, instead of using it as a political back and forth and using immigrants as political pawns?
100%, Don. I agree with you, right? Like, I've always said that, unfortunately, immigration is one of those issues that politicians would rather use as a political bludgeon against each other than solving the problems. And so absolutely, we should be streamlining legal immigration. We should be making sure the right technology is on the border to prevent people from coming in illegally. We should be using and focusing all of our foreign aid to address those root causes that are causing people to come here.
So why isn't
to the
that
United
happening?
States illegally. Well, it's not happening because there's no political will in Congress to do that. And I will say that there's a piece of legislation out there that would help alleviate it. I know it because I helped draft it. It was called the USA Act, and a Republican speaker prevented it from coming to the floor, and it would have had 240 votes. But guess what? A Democratic speaker could have picked that same piece of legislation up and moved it, and they chose not to do that as well. So again, this current crisis started under the previous administration. It's gotten worse under the current administration, and the leadership of Congress has responsibility for this over multiple leaders as well. So this is something.
Don makes a good point about Congress passing immigration reform, something that has been just totally elusive to them, and with both majorities. But when it comes to President Biden, we heard from Senator Manchin yesterday saying that he believes he can extend Title 42, acting on some kind of executive order potentially.
Sure.
Does he have that legal authority to extend Title 42?
I think there was a recent court case that makes that a little trickier, in my opinion. However, you have Title IX, and you have those authorities under that where you can do the expedited removals, which is being done under Title 42. That's the authorities that has existed, and why this administration is preferring to use Title 42 instead of the existing authorities. I do not understand the reasoning behind that. And look, I agree. Our legislative leaders have work to do on this, but ultimately it's the executive branch that executes our immigration laws. And when you're not using those laws to the fullest extent, it's the responsibility of that administration. And the degradation of the relationship with Mexico, the bilateral relationship right now is probably at one of the worst parts, one of the worst times in recent history. That's another thing that is exacerbating this potential problem. How have we not been working with some of the countries where the majority of folks are coming from to address those root causes? And so again, I think everybody in government, and ultimately what the American people want to see, they want to see people that have common sense, solve problems, and fix this issue, because nobody wants to see people dying on the streets in El Paso because they froze to death.
I think that's all true. And listen, I think they want to see lawmakers come together. There's a lot of blame to go around here, but ultimately it's up to lawmakers to work on this. This is a bipartisan issue. Thank you, Congressman Hurd. We appreciate you joining us.
Always a pleasure.